Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, folks. Hey, welcome to another episode of the Marketing Your Practice podcast, the podcast for chiropractors where I get to simplify the marketing and the mindset necessary so you can increase your income, your impact, and your enjoyment in practice too. Last year, I sent an email out to many of you. If you're on my email list, you would have got it. And if you're not on my email list, you should get on it. Okay, I send out lots of cool emails there too. The question I asked is with regards to the podcast, what do you want to see more of as well? And one of the overwhelming things that came back is that you wanted more of the book review episode. So Tony Croak, great chiropractor who's been on the podcast beforehand, and Martin, who's been on the podcast heaps. We have a little men's book review club where we read a book together and then we get together and we kind of share our thoughts about it. It's a great thing to do. And if you like reading, then I would suggest that you get your own kind of little book club group like this as well. It really ups the experience of reading the book. And I read the book very differently when I know that I need to discuss it with some friends. Anyway, this month we're reading a book called The Gap and the Gain. It's written by Dan Sullivan with Benjamin Hardy. The book's major premise is that basically we're unhappy and unfulfilled and unsuccessful because of the way that we're measuring progress. According to the authors, we all have an ideal, a moving target that's always out of reach. And when we measure ourselves about that target that's in front of us, then we're in the gap. However, they go on to say there's another way that we can measure it, and that when we measure ourselves against our previous self, i.e. how far that we've come, we're in the gain. Now, there's nothing revolutionary necessarily about this. There are elements of optimism and pessimism inside there too. The book is really simple in its nature, but it's actually profound in its reach when you dive really deep into this concept. I always identified and still do very much as an optimist, but this book helped me identify a bunch of areas in my life where I'm very much in the gap from the pessimistic side of things, and I could see where it's holding me back and how I can step into the gain and move forwards as well. I love this book. The book's promise is that it's the high achiever's guide to happiness, confidence, and success. I think it really delivers on that as well. So I hope you enjoy this conversation with Martin, Tony, and myself around the book, The Gap or the Gain. Let's go and chat. Martin Harvey, Tony Croak, welcome to the Marketing Your Practice podcast. How are you guys?
Excellent.
Should my voice just raise 2 octaves there when I did the how are you guys? So
I thought you were trying out to be in a boy band. But,
well, for those of you watching the video, Tony is clearly I'm sure that's part of what he's got going on through there too. Tony's the buff guy in the band. So
go down far enough that you see my nipples.
Yeah, that's right. So Martin, the one in touch with his sexuality in the pink t-shirt. And I'm not sure, with that voice I did before, I'm not sure that just makes me the little brother or something like that as well. So I was thinking, Tone, it takes some kind of podcast for me and you to be able to hook up for a chat nowadays. So I'm not sure if that's just a level of your importance nowadays, that if our conversation isn't being recorded and broadcast to thousands of people, I'm not prepared to have it.
Yeah.
So we're going to... we got a book review that we're going to be doing today. So the book is called The Gap or the Gain.
the Gap and the Gain.
The Gap and the Gain there is as well. So it's a Benjamin Hardy and Dan Sullivan book there as well. So the idea of the gap and the gain is one of Dan Sullivan, and not Dan Sullivan, the chiropractor Dan Sullivan. Yeah, the strategic coach Dan Sullivan as well. And so they've done a couple little partnerships like this as well. Who Not How is another good one that they've done together. Perhaps we can talk about that at another time as well. So that's what we're going to chat through today as well. So Martin, why don't you lead away with some of your thoughts and let's pick it apart.
It was sort of interesting if you go onto Goodreads for this book or you look at the Amazon reviews, there's a really common critique that I think sort of captures one part of my impression with it, which is that this is a book that it's sort of like that minimum publishable unit where they've taken what I think at the core of it is a phenomenally useful idea that was probably a good 20, 30 page concept and then spread it out into a whole book. So I think there's some really positive elements to it, but it is one of those ones where I had to find a way to push through the repetition that I felt like it had. So just that's kind of the review part of it. Having said that, I actually think the core idea of it is fantastic. Like it's a really, really useful structure that sort of embeds in it a whole bunch of things that you would think of as really useful ideas. So I'm happy, maybe you'd give your broad thoughts and then I'll come back to my key takeaways, if you like.
Yeah, okay. So I had read the original Dan Sullivan one, which is probably about 60 pages and 30 of them are drawings. And so it kind of meets exactly what you talked about inside of what the book could be. And it's a brilliant idea. And you and I had sort of spoken previously. I went through 3 phases of reading this book. Within the first chapter, you get the idea and you go, that's a great idea. I love that. I can see how I'm what I thought initially is I can see how I'm implementing that in my life, and it was a good reminder for me as well. And then there started to be a level of repetition, like okay, and it felt like let's hurry up and get over this as well. And then I decided there was 1 or 2 little things in there intrigued my interest where I went, I really don't do that. Like and I'll explain the gap or gain in a moment there as well, where I would have thought as glowingly that I was definitely a gain kind of dude, but I'm not nearly as much as what I thought I was. But I'll kind of give my overview of what the gap or the gain is, and then we can kind of fill in from there too. Most of us in life are heading somewhere, whether you're a goal setter or not. We have an outcome that we're kind of vaguely heading towards. And as we're heading towards that outcome, whether we get it or don't get it, there's ways that we measure our success and or failure. The gap would be a way of measuring how far have we still got to go to get to where we want to be. Now, whether that be a body weight, whether that be a practice size, whether that be a family kind of, married, all that kind of stuff like that too. Or alternatively, are you measuring from how far that you've come? So measuring from how far you've still got to go is what Dan and Ben would refer to as the gap. And measuring how far you've come is what they would refer to as the gain. Anything that you would add to that at all, Tone or Martin?
Tone, did you want? I'll go. So I would look at it and say that the core thing that they're talking, the big sort of moment of traction with that is that when we measure towards what we're aspiring to, that often puts us in a pretty unhealthy psychology, because the 2 things we tend to compare ourselves to in the future are either these idealized pictures of how our practice should be, how washboardy our abs should be, how wonderful our partner should be and our relationship with them should be. These kind of things that are probably not realistic. And so that can be really demotivating. Or we're comparing to others, which again, we don't really have a context of the reality of other people's lives or practices or any other domain that a goal could be in. And so that lack of reality, that lack of sort of full picture then puts us into like a frustrated, angry, negative. It's easy to tell yourself a story that you're not disciplined enough, you're not working hard enough, all of these things that are really counterproductive. Whereas being in the gain, looking at, well, look, I was here and I'm moving towards this ideal, and look how far I've come. These are the wins that I've had since whatever time increment goes past. It tends to be a more positive, engaging. You're excited because you can feel that you're making progress.
Yes, that when we stay inside the gap and we are focused on the external, then I know I've had numerous experiences of this throughout my life where I've set a goal, I've achieved the goal, and it's been a little bit of a sort of ho-hum. It's like, okay, or I've enjoyed it for a moment. And we've heard cliches lots before of, it's the journey, the process, rather than the actual outcome as well. That would be a part of looking at. But that when we stay inside that, I like one of the metaphors, and we'll talk about kind of measuring backwards and stuff like that too. But in essence, one of the ways I think about the gap is the life out in front of us is a bit like the horizon. As we keep on traveling forwards, the horizon keeps on shifting. And so there is that hedonistic adaptation that tends to happen that, it used to be a big deal to earn 100 grand, but once you're earning 100 grand, then it's 150, then it's 200, and the numbers kind of change with regards to that also. But this, because your experience too, when you were reading the book too, Martin, you kind of doubled down a lot on it as well, because you had that same kind of like, so what then dropped for you after you doubled down a bit deeper and started to discover some more depth to it?
So I think the thing that I realized was that I'd gone into it having that sort of transition that you described, where you go from, hey, this is a pretty cool way of describing this thing that I feel like I do to some degree anyway. And then as it was spun out, I realized actually with that specific example, I don't do that. I still do fall prey to the idealized picture of how things could be and the frustration when they're not at that point. Or this person has this and I haven't been able to create that. So he has a series of exercises you do. And I think I just decided, look, I'm just going to lean into this. Like there's some clunkiness to it. It's pretty apparent that it was written pretty quickly. So there's some areas that I'm just not going to pay attention to. I'm going to think of it as, if this is a good idea, but good ideas are really plentiful, that the benefit to them in your life comes when you apply them. These exercises are the vehicle to apply them. So I'm going to do the exercises, even though sometimes when I'm reading a book, I go, yeah, I already do that. I don't need to do the exercise. So that was probably a pretty valuable process for me. There's a bunch of journaling exercises early on, and then it leads through to kind of a daily practice, and then some extensions of that in terms of quarterly and yearly reviews that I thought were a really good application of those disciplines that I've used intermittently without ever really getting traction with. So that was sort of my approach to it, was actually to apply it as I read it, doing these exercises rather than just trying to absorb it.
The Benjamin Hardy has I think he has a PhD in some form of organizational psychology type sort of stuff there too. Tone, you've I feel like you probably should have an honorary master's in positive psychology after the great work that you've done with Tiff as well. These concepts here, do they match much of what you and Tiff in your support work with Tiff as well, in terms of measuring happiness?
Certainly what you talked about early on around, when you make X dollars, then all of a sudden that doesn't feel like much, and that concept is called the hedonic treadmill in psychology, where you got to get on this hamster wheel of, okay, I did that, now I've got to do the next thing and the next thing and the next thing. And psychology would say that when we find meaning in what we do, rather than and that's termed a eudaimonic experience, something that meets our need for contribution and having a vision bigger than ourselves, that's probably a healthier place to be than striving for the next and the next and the next goal. And I have to kind of put a disclaimer in that when I agreed that, because we've been reading these books together for some time now, and you guys said, Dan, do you want to do this one? I thought, yeah, I'll do that. And then I've not. So I had dinner with Martin a little while ago and said, all right, tell me about this book, because I'm nowhere in it. And he gave me the kind of brief summary that you guys have just covered. And that's as far as I've got with it. But the context for that is the death of my son, coming up 7 months ago, 203 days today.
Yes.
So I am certainly, one of the things that I've noticed about myself in that time is, if I get out of bed and do something of value in a day, I'm pretty chuffed. And so I think that has me very much focused on the gain rather than the gap. There are moments where I think, I was out of the practice for a few weeks, and certainly didn't have my head in the game for some time, other than to be a chiropractor. I certainly wasn't managing the practice in any way like I would for months, probably just until the last month or so. I guess I probably put my head back in that space. And so the temptation is to look at all the KPIs and in the practice and go, there's a gap there compared to what it was this time last year or the year before. But I find that unhelpful. And in fact, the practice is back in growth mode very quickly. And in a lot of areas in our lives, I think we're finding a new normal and a new, I talk about post-traumatic stress. And there's also another concept of post-traumatic growth. And I feel like that's kind of where we're headed. There's a guy grinding a tree stump. Can you guys hear that? Is it?
No, not really.
Oh, good.
Yeah.
That's right. If it does bug you, just let me know. So that idea of post-traumatic growth is something that we both, all of our family have put a lot of attention to.
Yes.
And it ties in really well with the concept of noticing what you do well, noticing what's working. And so the concept of focusing on the gain rather than the gap, I think, is certainly something that ties in well with any of the research that I've looked at in the last little while around how do you deal with situations like this.
I wonder if it might be helpful. I'm just looking back through my notes here. There's a good kind of little chapter takeaways, particularly after that first one, to kind of just round off this thing here too. That is this idea that, the gap is based on an unhealthy need or attachment of something outside of yourself. Which, going back to what you just articulated there, Tone, whether they be certain kind of statistics that practice those kind of things. The gap means you're trying to free yourself from something. And until you do, you won't be happy. I'm not going to be happy until, that sort of thing through there as well. When you're in the gap, you're avoiding the here and trying to get there, but never actually arriving there. That's a big one for me. I'll talk about that in a moment. The gain is based on being, so now onto the gain. The gain is based on being in harmony with what you want and knowing that you don't need it. I had some troubles with that concept. I really like your thoughts on that, Martin, in a moment there too. When you're in the gain, you live your life based on intrinsic motivation and harmonious passion, which creates flow and high performance. And then when you're in the gain, you're completely free to be happy right now. This enables you to commit 100% and pursue what you want without an unhealthy attachment as well. They share a story in the book about a young boy who was very promising American footballer, I think he was. Martin, do you remember the one story? Anyway, this guy was all set to go kind of round number one and stuff like that too. And when the journalists were kind of asking him questions about, what will happen if you don't go pick number one or, your career doesn't end up in a success, he's like, well, I'll be okay. Like, it's no problems at all. Like, I love my football, but it's not who I am. It's just one of the things that I do. And it really confused the media and the football area because they're like, oh, this kid's not for real. Like, he doesn't really love his football. Is he going, he doesn't have that hunger and that killer instinct. And I could really associate with that. But it took me a while to kind of sit into, he'd actually found this great spot. And later on when I was telling his story, he said, don't get me wrong, I love football and I love winning probably as much, if not more than anybody going around. However, if I lose, it just doesn't define me. And I went, it was just such a, because often, when I imagine the two polarities of that, I imagine somebody at one end who's just obsessed about winning the whole thing. Their life is all about winning. And when they lose, it's just the end of them. And then I've got some kind of apathetic person up the other end there who, is not prepared to put anything on the line. That was a really nice example of somebody in the middle who loved the idea of competition and growth and all that it expanded, all that it called of them, but realized win or loss, it didn't define who they were as well. Is that a pretty accurate summary of the dude?
Yeah. So to me, it was one of those things that, you often hear when we're talking about a hedonic adaptation and consumerism and a whole bunch of things like that, that when we define things that are wants as needs, that's a really unhealthy thing. So I need to, if we use a practice growth example, I need to see 200 people a week or else I'm not really contributing. I need to do that. Is that really a need? Like, will you have shelter? Will you have food? Will you have social connection? Will you have family connection? Yeah, it's not a need. It's simply not a need. It's a want. And so I think to me, the real value in it was getting that accurate perspective so that you could be attracted to it, you could be passionate about it, but you didn't have that unhealthy boom or bust. I'm getting closer to my 200 a week, therefore things are good. Or I'm at 180 and I was at 190 last week. I'm going nowhere. It was really that sense of how can I make every day joyful and enjoyable? How can I make the journey enjoyable? It was just to sort of make it that little bit lighter. And in terms of getting it, the other thing that I think was really useful in there that had a similar effect was to look at expanding the time frame. So when you're looking at this idea of the gap or the gain, and there's this idea of setting goals, and for a goal to be workable or a good goal, it's smart goals, it's specific, measurable, attainable, realistic, and time. There's a time element to it. The book very much advocates for, by all means, set those goals. However, if you're moving towards some sort of idealized picture of the way something should be, you probably, the big ideal is probably going to take you longer. And if you just take the pressure off in terms of the time frame on a lot of those things, it has a similar effect to me to define whether you define something as a need or a want. It just decompresses it so that it's more enjoyable. And certainly that's been a part of something, and we discussed it as a group before, that idea of that tendency, if you are ambitious, to turn into a bit of a workaholic. I was going to say alcoholic there, that might be a Freudian slip. But you tend to become a bit workaholic, where you see, like, if you're not working really long hours, if you're not working all the time, that somehow you're not being serious about life. Whereas I think this really softened the edges of that, which makes it more appealing to do. Like I want my practice to grow and its impact, and the ideal vision of it would be X, Y, Z. And I'm going to set a really long time frame to get to that. If I get there early, that's fabulous, but I want it to be enjoyable and engaging and be making progress along the way.
Yeah. Has this changed the way that you will think about kind of setting goals or outcomes or wants or desires or any of those kind of things?
Oh, for me, absolutely, yeah.
So share that.
So it plays like a lot of, it was interesting, a book for me, because there were a lot of different concepts that I've come across in other ways where I've understood them as a concept, but haven't necessarily had an operating model to plug them into. So one of those things is that, we spoke about in one of the previous books that we did, I think maybe one of the Greg McEwen ones, where the whole idea of if you've got more than one priority, you've got none. You've got to really just focus on a small number of things and achieving progress in them. Otherwise, you spread yourself too thin. And for me, it very much reiterated that tendency to take on more. And to me, the core element of this in terms of applying it is that daily thing of, I might just go over what his suggestion for your daily routine is. It's sort of a nighttime routine.
Very simple. Yep.
Yeah. End of the day, you jot down 3 things that were wins during the day, which is sort of an adaptation of that gratitude exercise of 3 things that I'm grateful for. However, just that little tweak of 3 things that were wins does a couple of things. First of all, it aligns it with, you've only got space for a couple of priorities that you're looking at there. And also turning it into a win rather than things that you're grateful for switches it from, I guess, being that circular loop of, I tend to feel like if I'm being asked to even if it's just for me, writing things I'm grateful for, that sort of loop of I'm grateful for my family, I'm grateful for my friends, I'm grateful to live in a wonderful country and have, like, it feels at some level ungrateful to not have them as the things that you're most grateful for. And then the other things that are about moving forward and perhaps more achievement sort of feel like, oh, well, that's pretty indulgent, really. You're already, in the top fraction of 1% of wealthy people on a worldwide scale because of the lottery that you won in being born a white male in Australia. So there's that sort of part of it where it sort of gives you permission to go, all right, for this exercise, I'm supposed to look for the things that were wins explicitly. Yeah. Then he adds another piece to it that you look at people like Cal Newport and other productivity people, there's a big focus on setting up your next day with just a couple of priorities. And so you jot down the 3 things that you want to be wins for the next day. So he, in the book, he talks about that having a couple of benefits. First of all, you sort of feel like you've got momentum into the next day. You've also got that sort of subconscious element of working on the solutions or the best ways of doing that, even though you're asleep or you're reading a book or doing anything else. You've sort of primed your subconscious mind to be working on those particular problems. And then the third piece I felt that he plugged into it, which I haven't actioned yet, but I'm sort of keen to, is the idea of then having an accountability buddy or group or whatever, where you just simply write a text to somebody else who wants to lean into this process and say, these are my wins, these are the wins I want for tomorrow. And, all you're expecting back is a thumbs up or well done or need any help or anything else. But there's a lot of psychology research that shows that the uptick of new behaviors and following through on commitments is massively higher when you have somebody else who's holding you accountable, even if it's not an aggressive form of accountability. So that was a really long way of answering that piece of that isn't the specific goal part of it, but to me, expanding the length of time over which I'd want to achieve a goal, having fewer goals that are more explicitly aligned with my biggest priorities, and then having that daily, quarterly. And so then he sort of suggests that once a quarter, you zoom out from that daily process and go, all right, what are the wins in the last 90 days? And then once a year, you go, what are the wins over the last year? And just list out as many as you possibly can.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, it's simple, but again, I note they refer to it as Pearson's law. When performance is measured, performance improves. When performance is measured and reported, the rate of improvement accelerates as well. So I found it kind of the whole goal thing I've been interested in, and going right back to in the early days. Tony and I both did a fair bit of work with John DeMartini around a similar time. And John kind of has this way of saying that life is always in balance. There's always as much up as there is as much down, as much good as there is as much bad there too. And that when we get out of balance with either of those ways, that's when there is an element of kind of chaos that'll bring us back down into that as well. In some ways, that brought for me a level of apathy. It's like, and having achieved different things in my life that might have been externally rated as successful and experienced them, went, that didn't really give me what I was hoping for, and not for very long as well. There was, I had quite a frustration with all of that kind of stuff there too. And what's changed for me, particularly in the last few years, is I kind of get this feel that as human beings, inherently what we want to do is grow and expand and try new things. And I think that's the thing that, pushed us out of the savannah and moved us on, is this constant, and I just see that everywhere. There's that drive inside of us, and there's certainly that drive inside of me that wants to do that too. And it's therefore set me up inside of this too, is that I know that as going forwards, that over there is not going to be better than here, but I'm not going there for it to expect it to be better than here. I'm going there because it's a desire inside of me, because I want to expand and grow and experience new things. And this plugs really nicely into it, because sometimes I will find myself getting a bit stuck of, oh, I'm still not quite there yet. And I can, and it's just a nice kind of bounce back around again of, where have I come from as well. They have this concept inside the book of the importance of measuring backwards as opposed to, which, I kind of touched base on before with regards to the horizon always moving forwards. And we should look at, which is part of that, what you said, that 90-day back and then 12 months back as well. But in essence, reminding ourselves of, what we've done and what we've achieved so far can bring out that sense of, achievement as well. Anything else to kind of add to that at all? Measuring backwards stuff?
Well, I think probably the core thing that I think we've said, but I just want to underline, is achieving anything takes work. And so anything that makes the work more enjoyable and more sustainable, I think, is a useful framing. And so kind of looping around some of the stuff that Tony's probably got more expertise than I do, that those ideas in cognitive behavioral therapy, where say Martin Seligman's idea of learned optimism, that optimists versus pessimists, optimists tend to look at things, that positive things, as being more personal, pervasive and permanent, and negative things as more temporary and not due to them, and very isolated in time, and pessimists are the reverse. That essentially this is a way of applying that having an explanatory story around what's happening and focusing explicitly on the positive things that you have gained, even though there may be some negative things that have happened along the journey, and you may not have achieved the ultimate goal that you were aiming for. And that learned optimism research shows that people who are optimistic tend to be more resilient and more willing to do things and do the uncomfortable things. I think I vaguely recall research that people who are more optimistic are more willing to do cold calls and those things that just are really incredibly psychologically difficult if you're telling yourself a negative story. So there's an element that I think that's part of it, that having this discipline of saying, am I in the gain or am I in the gap? If I'm in the gap, I need to very quickly look back and look for what has improved since last time. There's a couple of also sort of communication aspects of it that I think are really important for us to pluck out of it as a framework for communicating in practice as well. But if we want to wrap out that bit, I just wanted to flag that to come back to.
No, love it. I jump on your communication thing, because then I'd like to, one of the homework pieces in there is getting some clarity in around how you define success. So if it's going to be an intrinsic thing, what does it look like, and how will you know if you're achieving or not, and some thoughts around that. And do you want me to continue on with that, or do you want to go into communication?
Yeah, let's finish that bit off, because I think it marries in nicely.
Yeah. One in particular, which I'll kind of share here, there's a reference point of a guy named Dean Jackson in here, who's quite a successful entrepreneur and tends to kind of look at things a little left of center. A number of years ago, Dean came up with his rules for being successful, when he realized that chasing that external success there as well. So I'll read you out his 10 rules. I think there's many of them that, I love them all. So rule number 1 is, I can wake up every day and ask, what would I like to do today? Second, my passive income, my passive revenue exceeds my lifestyle needs. I can live anywhere in the world I choose. 3. Number 4, I'm working on projects that excite me and allow me to do my best work. Number 5, I can disappear for several months with no effect on my income. Number 6, there are no whiny people in my life. Number 7, I wear my watch for curiosity only. Number 8, I have no time obligations or deadlines. Number 9, I wear whatever I want all the time. And number 10 is, I can quit anytime. It's a lot of really nice things inside of there that bring out an element. Somebody like that obviously has a value that's quite high in freedom, it would seem, from what he's talking about there as well. But a lot of those really resonated with me, and I'm in the process of trying to get some clarity in around what my rules are as well. So did you ever play with that at all, Martin?
Yeah, I did. I did the journal exercise for that one, and probably I loved his rules as well. I think I think it's a really valuable exercise. And I think, to me, when you're talking about that idea of sometimes there's a temptation when you're setting goals to set easy goals, not easy to achieve, but easy to define. And so I want my practice to be at this level. I want to have this many dollars. I want to have done X, Y, Z. They're easy goals. And I also think the fact that they don't have that internal resonance necessarily is why they sometimes feel quite hollow when you meet them. Whereas I think those, and then we talk about abstract things like, I want to have more freedom, I want to have more autonomy, I want to have whatever. That's so abstract that you wouldn't know whether you got it. And I think the brilliance of his rules and the process of creating rules for what success means for you is you can turn some of those abstract ideas into, well, specifically, what would it mean to have freedom? Well, for me, freedom would mean, if the surf's good, I can go. That sort of thing that you can have as a rule that allows you to then build back from that. There are some very specific things, but if you then have, all right, if I have the practice at this point, monetarily, I have this point, then that's what creates the freedom that allows that more intrinsic thing to happen.
Tone, given the last 7 months for you, have you spent much time thinking about or redefining what kind of success looks like, what was important to you, or what is important to you going forwards now? Is it different than what it was prior?
Yeah, probably more. I've been able to kind of articulate my thoughts about that in the last month or two. We were just kind of doing the basics there for a while, and I think I was thinking before about the first probably 5 or so years in the practice I'm in now. So we've been here 28 years, and when I graduated, I had a job as an associate in a busy practice, and took over, I don't know, 40 or so people a week, and within a few months we're seeing a couple hundred or more. And seeing those numbers happen the way they did, I felt very full of my own importance. And it's a phrase that I've heard Martin use. I had delusions of my own grandeur, and so bought a practice, and in the process of doing that, did some projections on, is this viable? And the practice I bought was seeing about the same, about sort of 40 or 50 a week, and I thought, well, based on that and the fact that it'll be all me, and by the time I get to 9 or 10 months out, I should be seeing about 300 a week. And spent the next 5 or 6 years berating myself because it took me about that long to get there. And then when I got there, it was like, okay, 300 is not as many as I thought it was. Maybe, so then it was 400 and 500 and so on and so forth. And the last few months have been about realizing that the aspects of my life that give me the most meaning are the ones that matter the most. So I keep an eye on practice volume, but I really look out for how many times a day do I have an interaction with someone where both of our hearts are moved. I've taken up riding a bike of recent times, as middle-aged men I want to do. And so we've got a mountain here, Mount Macedon, that you can go up from two sides. And I've done the back side, which is the easiest side, a bunch of times, but haven't made up the front yet. So every little while I sneak out and see how far I can get up the front of Mount Macedon. And I'm about 2/3 of the way so far. And it'd be easy for me to look at the third that I didn't get. And now when I come back from a ride like that, I try to notice how I feel in myself, rather than what the stats on Strava say. And I keep an eye on those as well. But certainly the focus for me is, do I feel like that hour or two on a bike helped me be a better person? And in a lot of my day, that's what I'm looking for, is how do I be gentle with myself and with the people around me? And they are less tangible goals, and I can use those KPIs of heart rate at a certain speed and cadence in the pedals and all those sort of things. And I actually have found that they point me in a direction, that tell me how I am as a person. So there's actually a little bit of a connection there that I'm starting to understand. But certainly my focus is more on the eudaimonic than the hedonic, on the meaning and contribution than the achievement of some number or another.
Yeah. And that success. So I really, moments of meaning. How many of those did I have in my day today? I should really go back and find out who this conversation actually was. It on a Tim Ferriss interview, and I think is it Derek De Silva or Derek Silva? Doesn't really matter. I'll tell the story. I'll bastardize it, but to some extent, he too got obsessed with riding his bike and lived somewhere kind of coastal. And there was a loop that he used to do, which was, call it a 45-minute loop. Was it Derek?
Derek Sivers, and I think he lived like in Manhattan Beach or somewhere like that in LA. That sort of, just south of Santa Monica kind of area. Yeah.
So he'd get up every morning and he'd ride this loop up and back and constantly have his stopwatch on, and was impressed that he'd never missed a morning, but got kind of 9 months into it and got up one morning and went, I don't want to ride today. And he had a conversation with himself and said, look, go and have a ride today, but instead of just ride it. Like, if you don't want to do it at the pace, just ride the bike up and back. So he hops on his bike, he rides the coastal loop, and the first thing he notices is in around the second bend there's seals that are often playing on the rocks there. He noticed the seals there. Gets a little further up and there's a beach there and notices these families playing on the beach and doing all the kind of things. Bit further, the birds playing in the sky there too. And gets through his whole bike ride and just notices all these things that he hasn't been able to see for the previous 9 months. And as he pulls in his driveway, he kind of looks at his watch there, and instead of it taking him 45 minutes, it took him 48 minutes. And he had this realization that extra 3 minutes brought all of that enjoyment. And he, as a super successful entrepreneur, said, I'll never hurry another project again because I don't want to miss the enjoyment. The extra 3 minutes ain't worth it. As far as that, that has been something that has stuck with me. Most of us aren't racing for Olympic medals, and when we are, then clearly it's maybe worth it in that circumstance too. But to find those moments of meaning inside it and get really clear about it, that's a powerful life lesson for me. And I heard that a number of years ago. As well, this kind of practical application of, I read the book and listened to the audiobook kind of together there too. And at the end of each chapters, there are some discussions there between Dan and Ben as well. And I think, I don't know if this is the case or not, but Dan's take on it really is that being in the gap is almost the default mode for us as human beings, and possibly that way because it may well, when we're asking ourselves, should I take this new behaviour there too, if we want to be sort of risk averse and not get eaten by the lion or a tiger or kind of killed by a neighbouring tribe, then there might be some benefits of it. However, in our current society nowadays, you'd be hard pressed to come up with good reasons why staying in that gap is a good idea for you. That these external reference points, that everything from the television that we watch to, the advertising basically that says to us, you can be happy when, as opposed to being self-determined in it too. What I found interesting though, because they also create a real case for it, says, don't think for one moment that this won't allow you to achieve amazing things in your life externally as well, because they said, look, when we are internally motivated, we're more, as you mentioned before, we're more likely to make the cold call, we're more likely to continue on, we're less likely to beat ourselves up, we're more failure resilient, and or what they talk about kind of anti-fragile. All of these things actually come from that. The back end of this is that, focusing on the goal and the success is going to have you less likely to get there, and not focusing on it, is going to have you, ironically, if that's the right word, actually end up down that path as well. And that I found, that was a good aha for me also.
One other thing that I felt like it crossed over in that particular dynamic of what it takes to be engaged and wanting to continue to work towards something was the carryover or the crossover with Daniel Pink's ideas in Drive. So Drive is a fantastic book. There's also a really good RSA animate of it if you're interested. But essentially it asks the questions, what are the conditions that you need to have people be excited and engaged in their work? And those people can be you, or it's the model that I use in setting up things for our team. And essentially my version of it is that it's AMP. It's autonomy, mastery, and purpose. So if you can structure things to where, we've already discussed freedom, but in this context, it's not so much freedom as to whether you turn up to work or not, but freedom in the way that you fulfill the obligations of your job. Nobody likes to be micromanaged. It's not engaging, exciting to have a job where all the procedures are 100% mapped out and you have no say in it. Now, there's a balance there. You need to have enough procedures that things are handled, but it's one of the reasons that I don't love communication scripts. I prefer communication templates that give you a little bit of license, as an example. But if you look at the context of this book, there's that autonomy, that freedom, giving you the freedom to say, I don't have to hit this exact spot by this date. I've got a bit of freedom. I've got some autonomy in how I get there. And then the mastery piece, people are engaged when they're, what you were talking about, I think, Angus, where it's just naturally engaging to be learning, to be growing, to be learning new skills and getting new understandings, that if we are setting our life up so that we can be in growth and achievement, and we have a regular process of bringing to our attention that sort of that there is growth, that I have learned this, that I am getting better at this, that's intrinsically motivating. But there is a sense that if the default mode is to look for what you don't have yet, that we need to, if we want to drive our perception, then we've got to choose what we focus on. And if we focus on it, that drives our perception drives our reality. So there's the autonomy mastery piece sort of inbuilt into it. And then I think what Tony was reflecting on a lot is that purpose piece, that we are much more engaged when we feel like we're part of something bigger than ourselves, that we're contributing to some greater good. And I think in terms of this process, it's very much around it frees you up to say, I don't need this, I want this. How can I want something that's good for me and good for other people?
Yeah. It towards the end of the book, there's some interesting stuff in there, in around how we frame different things, and that framing an experience actually shapes how we experience the experience. So what we look at it, what do we call it as well? That, because going back to when you talked about the thing before bed at night, my 3 wins, Dan says that occasionally people will go to him, well, what if I've had a day where I haven't had any wins? Dan says, look, there are other wins or lessons. And if it's a lesson, it's a win. And that idea to be able to, change the language in which you describe something. NLP talks a lot about the power of this, that, perception is reality within, it is that, if we change the reference points for how we do it, we experience it in a different way there too. And some interesting models in around thinking that things that happened in the past are static, as opposed to them just being a mental projection based on today. There are many things in my, when I was going through my divorce with Linda, it was acutely painful and difficult, overwhelming a lot of the time. But when I look back on it now, I can see all that was good about it. I don't have that same attachment about it. I can reframe what has gone on from there as well. I can, all of those kind of things there too. I found that process there really valuable and a nice structure in around things also.
Yeah, 100%.
I think that's...
I want to do my communication piece.
Other than the communication piece, I think that's it. But let's finish on the most important stuff.
Yeah, so I could see some really simple ways that you could apply this process in terms of communication with patients, clients, practice members. In that, if we look at the discussion we've had, there's a default mode that we're going to tend to look at perhaps unrealistic goals. And I think that's a common frustration for practitioners, chiropractors, everybody, that people want to be feeling better yesterday and seeing you once. Like they don't really have that time frame. And a lot of these ideas that we've got to take the pressure off, we've got to expand the time frame, and that's a useful thing for health. There were sort of 3 pieces that I looked at, and some of which I've used, but I thought it gave a structure for it. It was really useful. The first one is looking at explicitly getting them to, you don't have to explain necessarily the gap or the gain, but if somebody's coming in saying, I've been coming in for 6 weeks and I'm still not back to playing golf, then having that ability to go back to where they started. So look, empathize, look, I 100% understand it's frustrating when you're not where you ultimately want to be. Can I just have permission to just give it a bit of a slightly different framing for it? If you remember back to when we started, you couldn't walk independently. You couldn't do X, you couldn't do Y. So while we're not at the ultimate destination, can you see that we're making ground here? So helping people to, in response to frustration of looking at things in the gap, having a framework of, we'll look at what you've gained, but also to decompress the time frame and say, one of the phrases that I've often used with people who have that, their response isn't as quick as they'd like or I'd like or whatever, is to say, look, I understand both of us would love for you to have your goals right now. One of the things I've learned over 30 years of practice is direction is more important than speed. If you're headed in the right direction, then we just need to keep doing the right things. Does that make sense? And so you can sort of fairly easily have people with that 1-2 approach who might otherwise be frustrated with their circumstance, then expand out. But also within the context of a more formal reassessment, I found that I've had a tendency, and I think it's fairly common, for us to focus a lot on, you've got this goal, you've got this goal, you've got this goal. And those goals, you are back to this, you're back to this, you're back to this, which is fabulous. We want to celebrate people's wins. I think it's even more powerful if you anchor back to the original source of that goal first. So if we use the same example, let's say we're a bit further down the line and somebody is back to playing golf, just saying at your reassessment, oh, it's fantastic, this is what has happened with your posture, this is what's happened with your range of motion, and you're back to playing golf, woohoo, this is awesome. I think it's got more emotional resonance and more value for them if you say, look, if I can just take you back to the very beginning, where you weren't able to walk, you weren't able to play golf, you had this, you told me you were concerned that this was going to be permanent. We're just 12 weeks down the line and this is what you achieved. Congratulations, XYZ. So I think that framing of going back to the beginning, measuring backwards, is psychologically really powerful. And if we look at a lot of the discussion around, it puts us in a psychological frame of mind to motivate us towards action, towards whatever our next goal is. It's also likely to, well, the experience I've had applying it more recently is just being more careful about going back in those situations has seemed to be really powerful.
I think one of the things that was super key in that, Martin, was what you first said was, when someone's feeling like they're not where they want to be yet, that empathy first. So that, because if we jumped straight into, oh, but look where you are now compared to where you were, we're in danger of missing their expression, their
and making them concerns and making them wrong for their feeling. Yeah. So I think that when we start with where they are and go, brings to mind a guy that I've been seeing the last couple of months, who's a builder, and he's had both hips replaced. He had a shoulder done, one of those reverse ball and socket replacement things, in December. So when he lies on the table, it's a one-handed thing because his shoulder doesn't work properly yet. And he was 4 visits in. He goes, "Geez, I'm still feeling a bit rough." I'm like, "Mate, it spurs on your spine like half a vertebral body wide." And so the temptation was to go, "Oh, come on, like give it a break." We've 4 adjustments into 40 years worth of crap here. But to go, "Oh, Stan, you and me, we're the same. I get impatient for change as well. I would love this to be faster for you, and I bet it's frustrating because you're dealing with so many constraints. And I want you to notice X, Y, and Z." And he's the team were saying that, "Oh, geez, something's changed with him," because he used to find making the next appointment a real challenge, and "Oh God, I'm busy with this, I'm doing that." And he came in the other day and he said, "Oh, I've got an appointment with blah blah. I can't. Don't worry about it. Actually, I'll change that appointment. I need to be here." So the power in that, helping people to first feel heard and then secondly notice what's good, is huge.
Some magic about being heard, isn't it?
Yep.
Just that connection that comes from it, that we can, I can, good job with that too. Yeah, love that, Martin. I like the practical application of how that all looks with our patients and stuff as well. And of course, as with everything, then kind of just wrapped in empathy makes sense. Anything else, gents?
No, that's me over and out.
Next time I read the book.
You did share an impressive amount of wisdom and personal experience, despite not having read the book, I've got to say, Tony. It was impressive.
Yeah. Love it. Well, gents, always a wonderful pleasure chatting with you both there too. And we'll decide what's next, hey? Done. All right. Talk to you soon. If you've enjoyed listening to this podcast, you have to come and check out my Community Influencer program. It's my monthly coaching program where we take all this material and I'll work with you to help you apply it, implement it, and systemize it. The Community Influencer Group Coaching program is designed to help you increase your practice income, impact, and enjoyment. Join me over at anguspyke.com/join. That's anguspyke.com/join. I'd love to see you there.